So about 3 weeks roughly into the month of June, I wasn't particularly trying to tune in to the upcoming energies for the month ahead. Normally I wait until later on in the month, towards the end of the month, and I will set a particular intention at times, or I may just ask the question consciously, what is kind of to guide me on what is the upcoming energetic imprint stuff that we will be needing to work on in order to heal and release for the upcoming months, because it's always good to have a bit of a heads up, I guess, so that we can start preparing ourselves, even though we still have to deal with the month and the week that we are currently in. But it was kind of a big one because it really stayed with me. So when I asked, I didn't get around to asking, as I say, I was actually doing my own practice. I was doing my own daily practice at the time. I had been doing some really deep stretching, and which I had actually been neglecting for quite some time, to really get into the really deep yin yoga stretches. And in particular, the hip area, the pelvis area, the legs, the thighs, your thighs can often be very stiff and strong, because the hip joints are our largest bone joints in the entire body. So the next would be our shoulder joints, or shoulder blades. They would be quite big. Our elbows, not so big. Our kneecaps, they're relatively big, but the biggest are the hip joints. And so in the hip joints, they actually store, it's the way the neural pathways from the spine connects into the pelvis and into the hip joints. Everything is connected. So the way the spinal cord is connected, and you've got all the electrical systems and pathways that are coming into your hip bones, and then obviously into your legs, and so on and so forth. But because this area is so big, the joints are so big, they actually store an awful lot of information, energetic information, and also emotional information, or emotional intelligence. And we all gather this over a lifetime, and a lot of us end up holding on to a lot of energy in this area of our body, which is why so many of us, as we get older, end up having so many problems in the pelvic and hip region, and often people having to get hip replacements, or having really bad lower back problems, and sometimes even having back problems, like it can be an injury that was done maybe in the pelvis. So it's not always has to be in the pelvic or hip area where something may have happened, a trauma or something, but it can be a direct result of that as well. But what happens is that everything gets blocked up. So all this energy, and all of it is all energy. So whether it's stress, whether it's hormonal, whether it's toxins, and not to mention all the emotional baggage that we all often tend to carry around or hold rather than actually letting go of, has to go somewhere. And a lot of it, the memory of it, gets stored into the hip joints. And I, as a result of a traumatic injury that I received, would innately have a lot of stiffness around, to do with the muscles anyway, in the tops of my legs. So we'll be talking about muscles connecting into the kidneys, the lower back, and the lower pelvic region. So it's important, particularly for me or anybody that's experienced trauma there, to really go into that area gently, but it is good to practice what I find a yin yoga practice, to stretch out that area. So I was going about doing my practice, which I had neglected for a while, and there was kind of a reason for it, I think, because in between that I had been doing some intentional deep breath work as well. And so this particular day I had happened to do some breath work beforehand in order to ready myself to really go into some deep stretching. And the breath work, for anybody that might have done breath work, this is also very deep. Even on its own, without yoga, it's a very deep intentional practice of releasing energy. And so on top of that, I decided that, yeah, definitely to combine it with yoga to really help to get things up and out. So as I was in my yin yoga stretches, I think just the day that was in it, the energy was there to be released. It was ready to be moved. It was ready to go. And I just got this extremely overwhelming sense and emotion, overwhelming emotion of emotion, purely and simply just of rejection. Rejection just came up into, it just surfaced. It felt like it was nowhere, but I knew it was from somewhere. And it was from the deep stretch, from the particular muscle in the top of my leg connecting into the lower pelvis. It was extremely tight. It's always excruciating tight. And I actually felt it moving. I felt something in the muscle changing that hasn't happened since I've had this injury. But with that release of that muscle, and it's only been on one side, it hasn't been both legs, it's only been on one side at that time, came this deep, deep, deep sense of rejection. And so I sat with that for a while, and I have to say it was very overwhelming. And I sat with it, I let it rise, I let it leave, I intentionally allowed it to move through me, and I intentionally and mindfully stayed with the emotion of rejection, and I went into it to see what was it, to name it, to address it. It was, like running, like almost like a movie screen inside of yourself, that you have to really honestly look at that pain of whatever that emotion is. The way things went anyway, as the days were unfolding and I was going about my other daily things, as the week was going by, I should say, and the rejection was still in my mind, and I was like, right, I've actually had this experience before. And I realized that whatever was surfacing for me in my own consciousness, then I understood that, this is also part of what is surfacing for the collective. But I didn't realize at that time that I was so ahead of myself for July. But as July has come forward with the energy and with the eclipses that have happened, and with the moons that we've had, the full moons and the new moons, we've had particularly strong ones, and a lot of planets going retrograde and so much activity going on. I realized as we entered July that the rejection came up within me first as an empathic person, to deal with it, to experience it, to feel it, to know it, to name it, and to release it. And when I started to do that, to process it, I also understood, being empathic, that this was also for the collective as well. And that is part of the nature of being an empathic person, that you are clearing a lot of these stagnant energies for the collective, which is partly the reason why now I go on YouTube and I make these videos to actually talk about it, because to gain the understanding and the knowledge for all of us to know what is actually happening and what's going on underneath the surface all the time, of what's emotionally under the surface, and what's not necessarily driving us, but it's kind of what's been aligned for us in some sense by the planets and by all the lovely ascension energies that are coming into us. So we are on a great cleansing process for the year of 2019. So the rejection, I understood that it's for the collective consciousness, but it was for me to understand it first. So coming into July, I got other confirmations from other areas and from other people that rejection was coming up as an energy consciousness and an energy release for other people who were also tuned in. And that's when it really hit home to me, when I really took on or realized, okay, so actually I was ahead of myself. I did know what this was. It wasn't just all about me. And again, it was that realization again of the oneness of consciousness, the oneness of people, the oneness of all of us, and the world is getting smaller, and our consciousness is expanding, I guess, in that sense that the world is getting smaller, and there's more recognition that we are all one. And this is still something that I'm still trying to kind of understand, even in my own consciousness and my own mind, is to forget, to let go of rejection, because rejection is separation. And we have this separation consciousness that we're constantly dwelling in this world, and this reality, in what we call this 3D universe. It's 3D, it's barely three-dimensional. What is that? Like, there's barely hardly anything. I mean, you don't see the magic in a 3D. I remember was it back in the 90s when they brought out those 3D glasses, and like, it was mad. We all went off buying them to the cinema to watch these fantastic, the new best thing that was coming out in the movies, these 3D movies. It was massive, and we all came home with these 3D glasses going, what the hell? What was that? 3D movie. I mean, what was it? It was the screen, it was the movie, and there was a slight lift of an image or a vision, and that was it. And was I a child when that 3D came out? I can't remember exactly what age I was. I don't think I was a child. I might have been an older tween, as they say. But I guess for me it wasn't stunning enough. 3D, I was like, it's the bloody same. It might as well just be called 1D. So 3D, we're moving and shifting into 5D. It's way more powerful. We're floating through 4D, a lot of us, and shifting into 5D, and we're going back and forth a little bit. So rejection consciousness, separation. So rejection can be anything. It can be the smallest of things, it can be the biggest of things. It can be severe traumas that people suffered. It can, as I say, it can be suffered in the womb, from before you were born, from the day you were conceived. There can be rejection. It can be seeded into that person from conception in the womb, and further on, and continue on after that. Where do you go with it? So depending on the circumstances of the conception, of the pregnancy, of the birth, of the relationship over it, all this is energy that's imprinted into us. And not all of us, I mean, not everybody has to have the exact same experience, but there is a seeded consciousness, and there is a certain number. And this is a numbers game. Consciousness and raising and elevating consciousness is a numbers game, because the numbers are rising, and the numbers do need to keep coming up. We need more and more awareness, and which is what I try to aim to do with these videos. So when you go into it, the rejection is something that we don't need to actually even dwell on, because now it's up for healing and cleansing. But we do need to name it. Not, God, I don't know why I'm not a poet, but name it and shame it. It keeps coming into my mind, name it and shame it. Because I'm sure there's probably a lot of shame attached to rejection as well. So sure, maybe name your rejection and in some sense shame it, because maybe you can go, I don't like you, but I forgive you. Rejection, and whoever inflicted the rejection, whatever circumstance caused the rejection, it's time to name it, not blame it, but just name it and let it go. Sorry, that was my cat. I don't want to be making this video and rejecting my cat in front of you, so I'm going to let her just to do whatever she's doing for the moment. Sorry about that. Thank you, cat. Okay, so that's really it, I guess. For the month of July, okay, I just burnt myself with my own incense stick. Thanks a million. Just go over there, leave me alone. It's due to the cat and me now rejecting the cat. I ended up burning myself with the incense stick, but hey ho. Okay, so sorry about that. Yes, and now she is sitting over there now staring at me. Okay, I'm feeling pretty shameful now, I have to say. Stop staring at me. Okay, I feel like I need to finish this now. All I want to say is, as an energetic update, go into that rejection, guys, because I know you're feeling it. I know it's coming up in the surface. Spread the message, raise that consciousness, do whatever you need to do to release it. And what I do say is, because rejection is it causes this infliction of separation, as I said. So it's like the sense of polar opposites comes into play with this, because if you reject something, then it's like pushing it away. So there is this sense of separation of two things that maybe might have been together or united. So when you reject, it's gone, blasted away, broken, whatever it is. So there's sense of separation. And what we want to do is actually to unify that and bring it back to one, which is where the one consciousness comes into it. And how can we do that? Quite simply by going into these feelings that we're having, if you are suffering from rejection and you know it deep down, go into it. Don't be afraid of it, just feel it and let it go. And one way I would recommend, it's going to be pivotal for July in order to help this process, is to learn to ground yourself. So grounding will be very important for July. Getting outside, going outside. If you can, go out in bare feet on the grass and the ground, but doing anything that will help ground you. So there's certain techniques in Kundalini yoga that are very, very grounding. But whatever it is, if it is whatever your practice of yoga is, even using certain essential oils, and not to mention crystals for grounding as well. Other things are, which I've used and I have actually found helpful in the past, is putting copper pennies into your shoes as well, because copper is conduit and that's also very grounding. So I am going to thank you very much for listening, and I really hope this was helpful, because I think I have a lot more to talk about and have a lot more to say. And I definitely, as an empath, have to make some more videos about really the struggles that empaths have in relation to talking about themselves and coming out of the closet as empaths. So that's all for me. Yeah, thank you very much. Bye-bye.